Welcome to another episode of 10,000 Roads to Financial Independence. Today, I have Andrea Johnson. Andrea helps high-performance, mission-minded women grow, lead, and succeed using the 6 tenets of intentional, optimistic, present, energetic, courageous, wise, and intentional. And for some, find the support, accountability, community, and freedom they need to accomplish their goals inside her collaborative group coaching program Launch from the Beach. She is a professional encourager. Love that. Her history of obesity and weight loss, infidelity and adoption, and the loss of her mother to lupus and breast cancer have provided the foundation for her to grow out of her own restrictive box and into the intentional optimist. So welcome to our show, Andrea.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So we were just kind of talking a little bit earlier, who is the person, like we always ask our interviewer this question, and who is the person growing up in a childhood that shaped you, the entrepreneur who you are today?
I know it's going to sound cliche, but it was my mother. And when I look back, I grew up in Seoul, Korea. My parents were missionaries and right. So I grew up traveling internationally, and my mom she was a brilliant lady. And you just shared in my intro that we lost her to breast cancer in 2017.
Yeah.
She was smart, but she played that traditional Southern lady, from Southeast Texas. And she made sure that my dad was able to get grad school and everything. And then she finally graduated from college when I was in college.
Wow.
And I think she went to 14 or 15 different schools because as they traveled around, she would get a class here, a class there. And she graduated from the University of Maryland on the Yongsan Army Base in Seoul, Korea.
Wow.
And she graduated summa cum laude. So
wow.
At 40 something, right? And she was smart. She had fabulous business sense. She could figure things out, but she just felt constrained to live in a certain role and in a society role. And there are ways in which we choose those kinds of things for good reasons. And then there are ways in which sometimes those are on us that are not great reasons. But at one point, we had some property that was quite large in Seoul, and they needed more housing. So they handed to my mother, kind of like me, 5 feet 2 inches tall.
Yeah.
They handed to my mother basically the project manager role for building. I think it was 15 or 18 townhomes. And she took Korean language when they first went there in the 70s, and so she did all of this in Korean with Korean contractors and everything.
Wow.
She was the project manager for this entire building complex.
Wow.
Now, if you know anything, I think you said you work in apartments. And so if you know anything about renovating or building, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And she also volunteered. She taught English as a second language. She did all kinds of things as a missionary. But she also volunteered for the American Red Cross. And she worked her way up in the ranks to where she was offered a GS-13 role, which is, I think, equivalent to maybe a colonel. And but she could not take payment because of the agreement with the mission sending agency that she had. She couldn't take any payment.
Wow.
So she did all of this for free. She did this whole project manager role. She literally brought in the VIPs and flew them in escorted them in helicopters up the DMZ.
Wow.
She did all this stuff. And she was just little Judy, she was little Judy from Texas. And so she was kind of under the radar, right? She did all these things. Then they came home from Korea. They left the mission field, came home to work in the home office in Richmond, Virginia. And I watched her kind of like shrink into the role that she was supposed to play. She got a job as a secretary, and I watched her struggle for years and years and years and just be frustrated. And then when she wanted to be promoted, she was frustrated and passed over. And, I was raised in all of that, so that felt comfortable for me. And I spent 23 years in some really good university medical centers. And but I watched that, and finally I hit a point where I said, I'm not going to do that. I've been created to do something different, to do something bigger, and I am going to. And at first, when you talk about being a coach, you say, well, I want to help people.
Yeah.
do you help people? There's 10,000 ways to help people.
Right.
And I figured out that I am the person who, we joke about being a professional encourager. I am the person who can bring you hope. I am the person who can stand there and be your hype man. I can do that for you, but I can also give you, after 23 years in the university medical system, be able to say, this is the structure you need. But I watched my mother and I said, I am not going to be told how much I can make. I am not going to be told how high I can go.
Right.
I am going to use what I saw that her capabilities were,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to fly higher. And that was the thing that she always said to me. Even the Sunday before she left us on Thursday, she got knee to knee with me and she said, fly, baby, fly. And so that's what I said. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fly.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm actually really impressed as how you can like recall that story and put yourself together. I'm like bawling my eyes out at that point.
Well, I'm also a performer, so
Yeah.
you didn't notice I got almost a little bit that
Yeah.
Sunday right before. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and honestly, when you start telling stories and you realize that they connect with other people, this is how we make a difference in other people's lives as we tell our stories.
Right.
And the more you tell them, the more you can do it in a clear way without completely losing it. But every once in a while I do, I confess.
Yeah. That's awesome. So Andrea, like tell us a little bit about, it's a very interesting journey that you had over here. So you had this aspiration from your mother and you see how that went down. So did you ever had, like a study, kind of like a daytime job? Did you kind of gone through the conventional way of, hey, I'm going to get a daytime job and doing this because you went to university and all that. And then had obviously that moment, maybe even moment leading to it, kind of a pivot moment.
Yeah. As I shared, I spent 23 years in university medical systems. So I worked in great, fabulous universities. I was at Johns Hopkins in their oncology center for almost 11 years. Right. And then I was at the University of Virginia in their research administration and operations in their School of Medicine for almost 11 years. And so I know what it's like to have the W-2. I know what it's like to have the constant paycheck. I know what it's like to have that there's a stability and there's a security there of knowing exactly what's expected of you most of the time and knowing how you can deliver on that. And there might be a schedule of this is the raise I can get. This is, how I can make it work. And I became a manager and I supervised research administrators, lab personnel, administrative assistants, clinical research coordinators. So I know what it's like to be in that system. Absolutely. Yeah. Was there a pivot moment for me? There were a few, but I think the biggest one, it was first of all, when we lost my mother, that was a point that and I'm big on reflection because I think that helps us see where we've been and how we can get to where we want to be. Right. I did a lot of reflecting, which is where my personal growth plan or my personal philosophy of intentional optimism came out. But it was after that, and I was already doing a hybrid job, research administrator, which is making sure that all of the NIH grants or all of the foundation grants go out without any mistakes in them. Basically, I was the regulatory lady, making sure that we got
That's very different from entrepreneur.
I hate rules. I hate them. And I would joke, but I'm good at it, right? So I know my personality. It's like, I don't like the rules, but if they're there, we're going to play within them and we're going to do them the best, right? We're going to beat everybody, But it was hybrid that and then operations. So I supervised all these people. And so finally I said, can I just have only the operations and can we hire another grant administrator? Because we had millions of dollars of grant money coming in. Right. And I said, I need somebody else to be able to manage this and to put these, because when you have grants going out, it can be quite the cycle. Yeah. And I was really good at building the relationships because that's my biggest strength. Yeah. And so I could build the relationships, but doing the regulatory stuff was really hard. And so when they said, yes, you can have this promotion, this is where it got. I got no raise, no bonus, nothing. Wow. And I said, I know, but I'm taking on more personnel. I'm taking on a bigger role. I'm taking these things off my boss's plate. I'm doing these things. And it came down to, you have not been doing, you're brand new in the role and you already make the same as people who have been doing this role for 2 years. Yeah. And I said, are you serious? Really? Because I've had the hybrid role, research administration.
You're doing
operations.
2 jobs. Yeah.
I was doing 2 jobs.
Right.
And you're not giving me any credit for that 50%, at least 50% of what I was doing already by making it 100%. You know, the buck got passed as to who made the final decision, but it came down to, and that was the day. I drove home. I walked into my house and I told my husband, I said, this is the last time anyone is going to tell me how much money I can make and how much I am worth. You are on notice. I mean, at the time, my LLC was already established. I was already coaching people. I'm a John Maxwell team speaker, trainer, coach. So I do DISC assessments. I'm a behavior analysis consultant. And I was already doing some of those things, but there's a lot of work that you need to do in that sphere before you're making enough money.
Right.
And quite frankly, I don't know that, you know, there's just a lot of work to do. And that was the moment. I think that it was a deal where I could have walked out the door at that moment. Yeah. And they took that chance. And then the pandemic hit and I was so prepared. I was able to move everybody off campus, off grounds and everything. We were the first division that was moved off grounds. We were the first one to do all of that. And I went on vacation and, the first vacation in 2 years. And while I was gone, I woke up, I was in Hawaii and we were going to Pearl Harbor and we had permanently moved. I thought I had permanently moved off campus. Right. And I got an email basically that said, oh, the Monday that you're back, you need to be back in the office. I don't have an office. I will find you a place.
Wow.
So that last week of vacation was spent figuring out how am I quitting my job. And by the time I came in and figured it out, I was like, you know, I think this is it. And I quit on July 6th. I mean, it was just so, I gave my 3 weeks notice or 6 weeks notice and that was it. So,
that's amazing. So that's obviously life always kind of throw you a curveball, but it kind of help you accelerate and push you to the right directions somehow. So you kind of touched on this a little bit more. That was kind of be my next question, which is what is that first year like when you first started doing this business, creating a community? What is the first year like? Because that's usually the hardest for an entrepreneur.
So I didn't actually start creating the community until almost a year ago. Mm-hmm. I was building a Facebook group thinking that's where it was going to be. I was coaching women and, you know, quite frankly, as you start in the entrepreneurial space, I didn't actually leave my job until August of this year. So I was doing all of this on the side. And one of the things you discover is that it's much easier to do things in your spare time and get a guaranteed paycheck. than it is to be the person who guarantees the paycheck. That's no joke. But the community itself, I started with beta groups. I reached out to women that I knew were the type that were very interested in my message. And it has taken still 6 months to kind of figure out the true, who am I really marketing to? Mm-hmm. And so putting that all together has taken a little more time than I would like it to, but I feel like it's just becoming more and more clear and apparent. And we're on Marco Polo channels. And if you know anything about Marco Polo, they have a channels program that is great for coaching and it's very relational because it's video chatting, but they've announced that they are ending their channels program. So I'm now in the middle of finding a whole new membership platform to do my groups. But I find that the community that's created is more important than any one person's ability to do it on their own. And the testimonies that I get back are some of the things that when other women go through the entrepreneurial journey, the things that they go through, having the support group, the accountability, even to get on a Zoom call and be able to just cry. Yeah. you know, it's you don't think of that as that's not professional. These are other entrepreneurs who get it and we care about you and we're here to support you. And so that has been some of the best part of building that particular group.
That's awesome. Now, obviously it kind of dovetails into the group. Tell us a little bit about the community and then what you're hoping to kind of achieve with it.
So ultimately, I'm going to give you a big picture view. It's called Launch from the Beach. I grew up again in South Korea and we had a missionary community or a beach community down on the West Coast. Yes. Okay. And
it's a peninsula, right? So
it is a peninsula. You know, when you're in it, it looks a little different than when you're looking at a map. Plus I was a kid, so I never paid attention. On the West Coast, about halfway down, called Daecheon. And the missionary community leased it from the Korean government for about 75 years. And so we had cabins and we had tennis courts and we had, I mean, it wasn't like fancy. It was a little more American than anything you would find there.
Right.
But it was this community that came together all summer long. That was my first job. I was a lifeguard at the beach and, that kind of stuff. But the beauty of it was a place where you could be yourself. It was a place where you could try anything. Anybody could take swimming lessons. Anybody could swim to the Monster Island and back, or the reef. Anybody could run the 3K. Even because it was a missionary community, church services rotated. It was a Lutheran one week and a Presbyterian and then a Baptist. And then, it's just, so it gave you this real sense of kind of a global community. And I felt safe there. I always felt like I could be myself. I was the chubby kid. I was too loud, but I felt really safe there. And as I began to figure out what kind of community I wanted to create for other female entrepreneurs, I said, I want that feeling. And so I started just kind of journaling and telling stories about the beach and the beauty of the beach and why I love the rhythms. And, because the ocean never stops. It's always got a rhythm going. Each wave looks a little bit different, but there's always a rhythm. And it's based on the moon poles. And I mean, it's just based on all of that. And when I looked at intentional optimism, putting it into the metaphor of a sailboat, it just worked beautifully. And I said, what I really want is to create this amazing harbor where women come and they can, start to learn to paddleboard and then get their boat out in the harbor and eventually go out past the breakers and come back in. The point being, we have a safe place to come from which we can get supplies and encouragement and all that kind of stuff and accountability, and then launch back out and bring in the beauties of the world, bring in the learning that we find out there, because the goal is to grow each and every one of us to be like the big schooner that comes in one day from out in the ocean, the seafaring ocean, and has given what we have to thousands and thousands of people. The point is never to take the information in and just keep it. The point is always to launch it out. So that's a little bit of
like you launch the beach.
Yeah. Yes. So when you have a little sailboat though, sitting on the sand, the tide in Daejeon, Korea is, my dad always says it was like the fourth highest tide in the world. I don't know what that means other than it's like a half a mile out to low tide. I mean, I'm sure that's hyperbole, but it sure felt like that when I was dragging a bamboo lifeguard stand out there. But it's really far. So whenever we wanted to go, we had little sailboats, we had little lasers and sunfish. And if you wanted to sail, it took 5 or 6 people or a trailer. What if you don't have a trailer to get it out there? And then you can set it down and get everything ready, but you can't put the centerboard down and you can't put down the rudder and you can't really pull the ropes in for the sail, because if you do, it's just going to fall over. You got to get it in the water. And so that's what the community is for.
Yeah, got it. And then, so you support mostly women entrepreneurs, right?
I do. Yeah, in this group, I do. Yes.
Yeah, exclusive. Do you have, what is your client like? What's your target client? The woman entrepreneur is what I kind of derived from the little descriptions that we have written before.
So it's more than that. She's really successful, right? I mean, this is, for instance, I can give you 2 case studies of clients who are a little bit different, but they have the similar qualities. They're global in thinking, right? One of them's in the UK, one of them grew up on Borneo, and so they have this global mindset, so they're not restricted by geography. They have a mission to help others through their work. One of them does, she works with nonprofits to help them, especially NGOs overseas that don't have the ability to just run a survey somewhere. So she helps them gather information and get all the data they need, and she trains them on software. But she needs help to figure that out. So she's got lots of intellect, lots of success. She's very successful. But she's helping others as she goes. And the desire is to have a lifestyle where she can actually take her family to go to these places and do this kind of thing. So the other one is she grew up in Borneo, and she's a television producer, and she's putting together programs that help educate and do things, celebrate different aspects of life. And her desire, she goes and she supports orphanages. So the ideal client here, or the woman that I talk to, is successful already, has a mission that is taking up her emotional time. So she would like to make money doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole point is making money from your mission.
Yeah.
And the goal is to create a lifestyle where you can actually enjoy your life while working your mission.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think at the end, like a lot of people reach out to us to say, "Oh, I want to reach financial independence," but at the end, it's like when you kind of deduce to it, it's about the freedom of choice.
Yes.
That kind of achieves the inner happiness for people.
Well, and helping people figure out what that method is to achieve financial freedom. I started out as an Amway distributor and then a Mary Kay lady. And I mean, it was a while before I realized I actually am a service-based, so figuring those, that's kind of where my podcast, it helps people kind of figure that out and get them to the point. I've worked with doctors and researchers and educational people for a long time. And I've watched how they need that structure to be able to pivot over here and say, my skills actually work in this area.
Yeah.
And so it's really exciting to watch.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tell me a little bit more about, because you kind of put this over there. So I think like there's maybe a little bit story over here to be shared.
Okay.
You talked about the history of obesity, weight loss, infertility, and adoption. And
nobody was no, there was no infidelity. We're good.
Sorry about that. Infertility, which is really hard for mothers. Being a mother myself and had a miscarriages myself, so I can totally imagine. And that would be devastating. So how did you work through all these challenges? Because there's a reason why you put this in your bio. So can you share some of these experience and how the mindset of the things, how do you use that then in your business to encourage women getting out of the rut, essentially? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll start with the weight loss first and the obesity. I was, like I said, I was the chubby kid. My family is genetically disposed.
I cannot see that. Like for you guys on the podcast, you cannot see this lady who's super good looking and super trim. Yes.
Well, thank you. I'm going to tell you my secret. I'm going to tell you my tools. Part of it is you just have to have a lot of courage. But I started out, I can remember all the way back to at least second grade being told to hold in my belly or, growing up in Korea, Korean people are genetically like fit. Yeah. And they eat really healthy.
Or skinny. Yes.
Well, I mean, they're like height in proportion to weight and they're trim, but part of that is their diet. And part of that is they don't drive everywhere and sit and watch TV all day, But being in that environment and then in an international community with kids from 65 different countries in my school. And back in the 70s, I'm gonna date myself. I'm just gonna tell y'all I'm 55. So back in the 70s and 80s, nobody was as obese as we are now. And as, in general, as the human race. And I was always the chubby kid and it just really was hard for me. It was never okay. And I struggled with it a lot. I also didn't know how to handle. There were certain aspects of my personality that didn't quite fit into Southern culture. Yeah. That I'm a little sassy, I'm smart, and smart's not always appreciated in some circles for women. And so I began hiding food. I began comforting myself with food. And there's a podcast episode that I put out recently. I'm happy to share that episode with you. You can put it in the show notes or something. And it's all about resiliency and weight loss. So I tell a lot of my story there. Yeah. But the bottom line is I went up and down and up and down. I did Weight Watchers. I was a cheerleader. I ran. I mean, it's very fit, but I was always chunky, as my 13-year-old son will say. It just became something that I could not control. And I put myself in the hospital for bulimia and depression when I turned 20 in the hospital. Wow. In a 12-week program, and got a lot of tools. That was the first time somebody said to me, Andrea, you have control over your thoughts. You can actually change what you think. You have control over what goes in your mouth. It was the first time that anybody had ever said anything other than white knuckle it and count points and calories, Right. And that was the first tool I put in my tool belt. And as I grew and as I learned, I had plenty of setbacks. By the time I'd been married, I was married at 27. And then I guess 10 years later, I was over 300 pounds. I'm not 5'2". I'm
Yeah.
just not 5'2". I've tried to say I was 5'2" for a long time. So that's a lot of weight on this. And
Yeah.
my ring is a size 4.5. So it tells
Yeah.
you I'm a petite boned person. And my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was the
Right.
thing that just put me over the edge. And there are certain aspects to obesity and to literally fat tissue that make it difficult to lose weight.
Yeah.
And I was at Johns Hopkins at the time, and I looked into bariatric surgery, and I didn't want to go with the big gastric bypass, but I knew I needed to do something because my mother's breast cancer was hormone related. And I knew that anything that I wanted to avoid, obesity just makes it worse and makes it harder, and it makes you predisposed to things. And there's diabetes in my family. So I said, I need to have gastric bypass. And my husband was super supportive, decided whatever you can't eat, I don't eat. Right. So, I had gastric bypass, the big Roux-en-Y, on March 31st, 2005. So I'm a poster child for that. I haven't been perfect. I've gone up and down, but I've never gone really high. I'm not perfect in that I still eat to soothe myself sometimes, but there's certain, I can't have carbonation, I can't have alcohol, I can't have sugar, so, but
it's
I will
really
say
hard. I mean, I know people who went through that, operation. It's really hard.
It is not the easy way out, my friend.
Yeah.
And there are dangers to it, but I maintain that for my health, it was the best decision I ever made. One of the things that is also affected by obesity is fertility. And I knew my mother had some issues younger. She had a ruptured ovary when I was in 5th grade or something. And she had a hysterectomy when I was in 6th grade. And I knew she'd had quite a few miscarriages, and we wanted to be parents. And so that was another aspect that so you have to wait after gastric bypass because you're basically starving yourself.
Yeah.
We had to wait 18 months. And I did get pregnant once. And I think at the 9 or 10 week mark, I had a miscarriage.
That's really hard. Sorry.
It is really hard. And I know that you understand that. And I'm sorry for your loss as well.
Yeah.
It did introduce me to a whole entire group of women that I now stay in contact with.
Right. And then
it was back when Yahoo groups were a big thing, But at 37, I started, it was in perimenopause. I didn't even know it. And by 40, it was, we went to a fertility specialist, and older gentleman in a white coat sitting across the desk says, you have a 13% chance of a live birth. And I said, oh, and that's with in vitro fertilization. And that is not a benign process either. Yeah. It's really hard on your body. If you're going to do that, you really need to understand what you're getting into. And I had just done something really big to my body.
Yeah.
I'm like, adoption's 100% chance. And I don't want to do that. And I had grown up around adopted kids. So that was very normal to me.
Yeah.
Some of them were cross-culture adoptions. Some of them were biracial adoptions, and some were just, the same. And it took my husband a while, and we looked at all the different ways to do it. We looked at private, we looked at agency, we looked at going through the foster care system, and we finally decided on private adoption. So I actually set up our website, had an 800 number. I screened all of the birth mothers. We had 4 or 5 major falters. Yeah. I mean, and you have to learn adoption law. In every state, it's different. It's not federally regulated, so every state is different. So I told you, I'm not dumb, right? We're smart. My husband was a reporter before he was a pastor. So we have all kinds of resources that we draw upon. And I think that is, when you want to be an entrepreneur, having that ability to have some self-advocacy is the most important piece, because you have to be able to say, I can do this. And so we said, we can do this. And I got to tell you, there were many tears shed through that process. And right after a terrible deconstruction of a relationship, which turns out it would have been a very difficult adoption. So we're grateful, because we believe everything happens for a reason and there's providence involved. A lady in our church in my Sunday school class said, she'd been bothering me. Can I have a birth mother letter? Can I have a birth mother? And I said, can I just lick my wounds? So finally I just handed it to her. I'm like, just give it to her, shut her up. Right. 2 days later, this young girl gets in touch with us. I have been on your website for 2 days. I think I have your son. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And he was 9 weeks old, and within 48 hours we had custody. And he's amazing. His name means gift, and we had no idea. And he was being passed around. She thought she could keep him, and he was just being passed around from babysitter to babysitter.
Yeah.
And he's our only, but I'm 55, so
Yeah.
there was a point where I was like,
yeah,
okay,
lots of challenge over there.
But I'll tell you, I would not trade it. It has opened our eyes to see things that we didn't know we needed to see. And if you're going to be an intentional optimist, that's basically what I train people to do, is be an intentional optimist, to be able to be optimistic and present and courageous and energetic and wise and intentional. If you're going to do that, you have to be willing to see the hard stuff. You have to be willing to take on adventures and be willing to see hope for the future. This is not a like put your rose-colored glasses on kind of philosophy. This is very real. It involves very real hurts, very real traumas, very real victories, and very real overcoming and accomplishing. And that's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And how does people find optimistic? Like intentional.
How do they find me?
Optimistic?
How do they find the intentional optimist? Well, my website is the easiest place to go. It's theintentionaloptimist.com. And you need a "the" in there. I am on Instagram. I am on Facebook. And I'm even on Clubhouse, but not much. And I'm on LinkedIn as well, because a lot of professional women, that's where I make a lot of my professional contacts, is through LinkedIn. And so you can find me through any of those, or Andrea at theintentionaloptimist.com. You can email me.
Awesome. And then we're going to put that on the show notes as well. And on her website, she's got, you've got some podcasts as well. Tell me a little bit about your podcast.
So my podcast is called Intentional Optimists, Unconventional Leaders, because it's all about the idea that women lead with our own strengths right where we are in any way we need to. And we want to point out that every woman is a leader and every person is a leader, but specifically I talk to women. And so for the first year, basically, I taught solos, every other one. And then I interviewed women who then lived out those intentional optimistic tenets in some way. And there's some fabulous interviews in there. And y'all, this next year is going to be so good. We're kind of taking it down a little bit, niching it down just a little bit more to be really focused on female entrepreneurs, women who are pivoting out of corporate, women who are pivoting out of academia or law or medicine into being something that they're called to be, right? Stepping out into their mission. And so instead of doing pure teaching, I will be kind of reacting to some of those in my solo episodes, and also having conversations with my producer, and because it's a lot of fun to do it that way. But you can be on the lookout. The goal is by the first of the year to have the YouTube channel launched as well.
Nice. Yeah. That's awesome. Get going. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for your time today. It's the end of the show, and then we're going to put Andrea's contact inside of our YouTube show notes over here, so you can get in touch with her. If you are someone who is looking to launch into entrepreneurs, especially women, I think you can find a very much alike minded community, which is communities are really important on entrepreneurship, because the good thing about W-2 jobs is you have colleagues, you have water cooler discussions. But when you become entrepreneurs, especially in the first couple of years, it sometimes feels lonely and definitely need a community to kind of support you. And
I had a conversation with a woman just last week who's amazing PhD. She's launching this huge organization. And she said, I don't know any other entrepreneurs. I said, come on in, baby. The water is fine. We got you covered over here. And so it's that kind of a woman who, she is the exact ideal client. She's got really high expectations, and we'll help hold her accountable.
Yeah. Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrea, for the show today. And we logging off for another episode of 10,000 Roads to Financial Independence.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.